And if I want to create a new grease pencil object, if I go to my object tools, whenever you create a new object, it will be pre-populated with a set of gray tones as well as a black and red line. So black for just general drawing and red for if you want to do notes or something. If you hold down Control, that will bring up your lasso, which in this case, when you're in draw mode, will act as a quick eraser. Okay, and if you hit 2, this brings you into edit mode. So if you hit scale, that makes like S for scale, it will make things bigger or smaller. But another thing, this is actually default to Blender, but if you go Alt-S, it will allow you to change the thickness of the line. So I find this is really helpful if, say, like you draw something too thin the first time or too thick, you can go in and do that. Then I'll usually just go in and clean up some stuff like this. Get that line out of the way, make the ear a little bit more clear. And then let's go to the paint bucket tool to show an example of a fill. So colors are treated as like a material which can have a line or a fill or both. So for this one, I've simplified it by them just being predetermined as being lines or fills. So if I select one of these grays here, see, as I draw, it works like a lasso fill. And then if I switch to using one of the lines, you get the line. So when you want to paint, do a paint bucket fill, you would want to select the color you want for the fill, go to the paint bucket, and I find it usually works best when you set this to negative. So that right now, I put it on the same layer. So if I go down to my pre-made fill layer, it will reference all the layers. So now when I click fill, it'll put a fill within our character here. The fill option, that's a default thing in Blender. Good to know for beginners where those are. I'm making stuff easier to find, but as well, there are stuff in Blender, if you know it, will make it even better and more efficient to use. So I'll just go back to the pencil tool to make sure that we're drawing again and not filling. And for whatever reason, I find Blender's algorithm for fill works better when you have it on the inverted side. So if I go erase this, if this is on, oh, that's wrong tool. So if I'm on here, so the plus means positive, so it'll fill interior spaces. So sometimes it has problems calculating this. Yeah, so that didn't really work, but I find for whatever reason with Blender, when you have it in the inverted, it works instantaneously. And then if you want to go in for more specific details like the eyes or something, right, you can just go back to your pencil, and since it's lasso fill based, just draw that in. And I have a hotkey set up in the add-on, which is W, which will temporarily bring you into sculpt mode. And you can just go in this case I have smooth as the default for sculpt. So if any lines are looking a little janky, I can go in, smooth them out real quick. And then when I hit release W, it brings me back to draw mode, and I can keep drawing. So these are all little things I put in to make it more friendly when drawing. As well, I've added in hotkeys so you can rotate your camera. Shift middle mouse is what I've set this hotkey to. I really advise setting it to your the hotkeys on your pen, because that way when you're drawing, you always want your drawing hand to be on the screen so you're not losing your spot. So you can just like rotate, draw, instead of going back to your mouse and then coming back to draw. So you're always at the spot you need. So you can do that. So I usually make one button on my mouse for moving the canvas and another one for rotating it. And when you get close to 90 degrees again, it will snap, so you don't have to worry about your shot being like slightly off. So it's got snapping to go back to default. So the thumbnail scene, it's a specialized scene that has 144 panels in it. And you can actually change, if you change the resolution of your project file, these will automatically scale to go along with it. And when we go in to draw, so let me just zoom in a little bit. So you could say draw a cube or something, very basic. Let's get my thumbnail. So this way we have a drawing. Now, when you're working in the thumbnail, there's a special kind of copy paste in this, which is Alt copy and Alt paste. So if you go Alt C and Alt V, it will allow you to paste into your different panels and out of this project as well. So if I go 0 here, we can see we actually have just copy pasted the same box a bunch of times. So if I move my camera back to the first panel and I draw a circle, right? So this is one thing you got to keep in mind. So if I get a circle here, if I control copy to copy it normal and go to the next panel and then hit paste, you won't see it show up. But what's actually happened is it's still pasting in the same location. So when you're working in thumbnails, you just got to make sure that when you're copy pasting, you go Alt copy and then Alt paste. And that will get that there. And the other advantage of that, and actually I'll make a new scene to show you this. So if I create a new scene, so the scene has nothing in it. If I go to my thumbnails, so let's say I want this box and the circle in there. If I go Alt copy and I enter into the scene and I hit Alt paste, it will put these right in here. But if I go to a panel, say over here, let's draw like a star. A quick little star drawn here. So if I alternative copy, so Alt copy that, and I go into my scene, I'm just going to erase this, and I go Alt V, it's going to paste it there. So it remembers the position of where things are in the thumbnail view to make sure when you're pasting it, it will always be to the center point of a new scene. Which on that note, I'm going to create a new scene. Go into the scene. I'm going to bring in a Suzanne mesh. So when I close down scene tools, you can see how there's these object tools here. So stuff about creating grease pencil objects, as well as there's this one here called the quick outline tool. So this will add a modifier that essentially adds like a back-faced outline to whatever you have selected. And if I go and put in some other objects too, like the sphere, you can add it. You can edit each object independently, or if you're doing a group of objects, you can actually work with them together uniform. And there's also a lattice tool. So when you create a lattice on a single object, it will automatically bring you into the edit mode, so you don't need to exit out of it. And when you hit apply lattice, you can either have the lattice or the object selected, and we'll still apply it to the object and bring you to the active object at the end. And if you add the lattice to multiple objects, you then can add them in bulk, but you have to go into them individually to start editing them. But if you're doing just a simple lattice on just one object, to make it simpler, the add-on knows that, if you're adding a lattice to a single object, you're likely to want to edit that right away, so it automatically brings you into the editing view for the lattice. And you don't need to apply it, you can just remove it if you don't want it. And another thing, when you add an outline, if I go to edit mode into my materials, you can see I've actually generated a bunch of different tones as well. So when you create the outline the first time, it creates these tones onto the object. And you can also remove and add the outline, and the tones will stay there. It uses Blender's default for when you create objects, so you're just going Shift A and say like bring in a cone, right? So that's just a normal cone, and it's got no material on it. So when I add the object, it generates the materials, and then I can change the lines. So another reason to not do the lines right away is if I go into material preview, you can see how it's just kind of basic here, right? And then, when I go into the viewport shading, it's kind of basic, and here we can see the outline. So not every board artist likes to do the outlines. I come from, obviously, an animation background, so seeing outlines is very normal to me, but there's also people who come from more game cinematic backgrounds where they're just more used to that basic gray box look. So maybe they don't want outlines. So it's an option for those who are used to more simple fills and outlines being the visual they're used to working with, versus people who are more used to just bringing in geometry and shading internally in the add-on itself. I have a thing set up where, say I have my different colors, right? And I want to make a new grease pencil object. So I made a new grease pencil object, and I go back to the old one. I have red selected, without the add-on installed, it would not link the color, like the material you have. So I've added in material linking between scenes. So when you're going from one scene to another, whatever material you have, if it exists on that grease pencil object, it will always be selected. So I've done a bunch of back-end stuff to make grease pencil behave more like other drawing programs. Oh yeah, and another thing here too. Let me go into object mode. So you can see how this object's being intersecting with the monkey right here. I've also put a quick access here to the draw in front feature, which is a standard thing in Blender, but I found a lot of people using it were just, working more of a 2D way on top of 3D. So giving you quick access to toggle off whether or not your grease pencil objects are affected by the 3D geometry or not.